They told me I was too poor to be a grandmother in public, and I nodded like a fool, until the night I photographed a silver locket at the playground and realized it carried my daughter-in-law's maiden name, the one she swore never existed. If you've ever had your love itemized, you know how it starts, a small list that grows fangs. No sleepovers, Nora said, smoothing her silk blouse with the kind of care she never offered my feelings. Your place is cozy. But the kids are used to better. Better meant marble countertops and a car that hums so quietly you don't know it has moved until it's gone. It meant, apparently, that my thrift store couch was a moral hazard. I am 63. I answer to Grandma, to Mom, to Helka, if you catch me on a day when I am remembering the village stories my mother told me. I stitch hems for extra money. I ride buses. None of those things made me less a grandmother. And yet the day my son, Adam, stood beside Nora and cleared his throat like a courtroom clerk, handing me a visitation plan, a thin, printed insult with bullet points, I felt like someone had pressed me into a frame and hung me on a wall labeled past. Item 1. Visits only at their house. Item 2. No unsupervised time. Item 3. No photos posted because austerity aesthetics don't align with the brand. Brand? I repeated. Nora sighed, the patient kind. We're building certain partnerships, she said, tapping her phone. The kids' accounts are growing. It's delicate. Growing. Delicate. Words that felt like a thread pulled tight around my throat. I smiled then, small, tired, dangerous. Make me the tea, I said. My mother taught me long ago to boil water whenever someone tries to boil your spirit. Tea buys time. And time, if you are poor, is where you earn your cleverness. When they left, I unfolded the paper again. At the bottom, in gray ink that implied, not asked, was a signature. Nora's. Elegant, looping, practiced. Below, small initials in a box, N.M. Adam's name was printed, but he hadn't signed. I caught that, tucked it away like a pin in the hem of a dress I planned to alter later. Suspense has a sound. It's the hush that follows the click of a door. That hush filled my little kitchen until the refrigerator's motor remembered to be brave. I sat, pulled my notebook down from the shelf above the sugar, and drew a bee. Nora's jewelry always had bees. Little golden ones on earrings. A black enamel bee on a bracelet. She'd once said it symbolized refinement, hard work, a family emblem. I had smiled and said bees come for flowers, not for money. She'd smiled back and not understood what I meant. That evening, I walked 2 extra bus stops so my feet could outrun the heat in my chest. I ended up at Sparrow Park, where they take the kids on Saturdays. The lights from the new condos turned the rubber playground surface the color of melted coins. On the bench near the slide, a glint. A small oval locket on a thin chain. Silver. In the center, a bee so delicate it might fly if you exhaled wrong. I should have turned it in. Honesty is another word for survival when you have nothing. But I listened to my instincts, which have kept me alive for 6 decades and change. I took a photo. Front. Back. Close-up. On the back, in tiny engraver's script, my phone's lens caught a comma-shaped scratch after the letter, as if whoever did the marking hesitated. A man in a neon vest pushed a stroller past. A woman downloaded something loud at a picnic table. No one was watching an old woman with a bus pass take pictures of a lost trinket. I left the locket where it lay. I took the bus home with my notebook warm under my palm. The plan, if you could call it that, unrolled in the days that followed. I started in the ordinary places where people hide extraordinary things: marriage licenses, foundation websites, scholarship fund pages, all the public faces of private appetites. The clerk at the county office recognized me from the years I'd brought in sewing for her cousin. She printed a copy of Adam and Nora's marriage record and clucked her tongue. People change names like shirts these days. The license said Nora, May, no middle name spelled out, no maiden. A box ticked, previously unmarried. The signature clean. But in the space reserved for the officiant's registry number, the ink had bled, like someone pressed with a hand that didn't believe itself. It gave me nothing. It gave me everything. You learn to hear the lie in what isn't there. At the library, I asked for the newspaper archives and a computer card like a student who forgot her age. I searched for jewelry and local foundations. Honey and Bone, a brand that specialized in heirloom honoring accessories, popped up with a familiar logo, a stylized V with a crown. The founder photo blurred my vision for a second. Nora, before the blowouts and the sponsorships, hair darker, face open, eyes less guarded. The caption listed her as Eva Mayan. The initial at the end looked like an afterthought. Eva. The locket. I wrote the name, printed it, then wrote it again in cursive the way my mother taught me, the way letters look when you want them to feel like people. My neighbor, Mr. Pennington, is a retired postal inspector who mows his lawn like it owes him money. He knows how to follow paper without making it bleed. When I showed him the printed article across my kitchen table, he didn't ask why a grandmother had turned detective. He looked at the B logo, pursed his lips, and said, "You could knock on the brand office. They open a pop-up downtown every Thursday." Would they tell me anything? No. But they might tell themselves too much. People who build brands love the sound of their own information. He came with me. He wore the suit he reserves for bad news and good funerals. I wore my thrifted blazer with the lining I had re-sewn 4 times. The pop-up was glass and fern leaves and attendants who glide. I pretended to examine a display of bracelets. The attendant smiled like a stage light and offered Prosecco. I declined. "I'm looking for something like this," I said, showing the B photo on my phone. "It belongs to my daughter-in-law." Her eyes flicked to the screen and back to my face. "We don't produce that model anymore," she said, too quickly. "Vintage is so tricky." "Tricky how?" Mr. Pennington asked mildly. "Provenance," she said, relieved to have a word that sounded like money. "We encourage clients to purchase current collections." "What about the founder?" I asked. "Is she here?" "She consults remotely," the attendant said. "I can take your info." Behind her, on a shelf of coffee table books curated like alibis, a spine read, "Bees, Bloodlines, and Belonging." A brand memoir. I touched it. The attendant's smile faltered. For a moment, the fern leaves seemed to stop breathing. On page 37, a photo, Nora Eva, in a cheap white dress, hair pulled back, holding a locket in her palm. You could see the B. You could see the back. The engraver's E alone, like a door left ajar. The caption, "First piece, made from a family heirloom." "Family heirloom," I murmured. "Whose family?" I bought the book with crumpled bills that left my fingers smelling like the pockets they had lived in. On the way home, Mr. Pennington said, "You're moving toward something. Are you prepared for it to move toward you?" "Yes." Sometimes saying yes is how you build a bridge before you know what river it will cross. 2 days later, I received a message from Adam. Not a call, a message, brittle with politeness. "Mom, please don't make things hard. Nora's anxious. The kids have schedules." When your son tells you you're making things hard, you learn which hardness to keep. I made pierogi because my hands know that choreography better than grief. As I rolled the edges, my phone lit with a different number, local but unfamiliar. "Is this Helena?" "Yes." "This is Mariana," the voice said, careful, accented like mine. "You left your number at the pop-up." "I didn't." "On the bookstore receipt," she said, likely meaning Mr. Pennington had left it. "I have something for you to see." "Not here." "Not the shop." We met at a coffee stand under the L train, where the air tastes like pennies and old stories. Mariana looked young enough to be my granddaughter and old enough to know better than most about pretending you're fine. She put a small envelope on the table. "Please don't ask how I got it," she said. "Please don't use my name." Inside, a copy of an application for a charitable grant to the Honey and Bone Family Fund. The applicant's signature, EMN. The attached letter listed goals: supporting families of loss, protecting brand integrity, expanding legacy. At the bottom, a notarization stamp. The notary's commission expiration date had passed 2 years before the letter was signed. Sloppy fraud. Or arrogant. Often the same. I looked up. Mariana nodded at the envelope as if it were a small animal we needed to handle kindly. "I loved her at first," she said, voice lowering. "She made me believe beautiful things about my future. Then her rules grew teeth. Whose rules? Eva's. Nora's, she corrected, tired. The founder. What do you want me to do? Whatever you came here planning to do, she said. I think she keeps people by convincing them they'll break without her. Maybe you can show someone that's not true. She left. The trains rattled overhead. The coffee turned cold. I put the envelope in my bag and felt the weight redistribute my spine. I did not go to the police. Not yet. I am not unfamiliar with how wrong doors can shut when you are a woman who wasn't invited to knock. I went to the place where rules meet the people who believe in them. Court. Grandparent visitation. The clerk gave me the forms as if she were passing me a small boat in a storm. It's hard, she warned. You have to show involvement, stability, harm if contact stops. I can show all of it, I said. What about the parents? One is my son, I answered. The other is complicated. She looked at my hands. The fingers swollen at the knuckles from years of sewing the same sadness into different dresses. Bring a folder, she said. Bring everything. I brought more than a folder. I brought a story with room for evidence. Receipts for school shoes I had bought when they forgot sizes. Photos of homework at my kitchen table. Notes from the pediatrician where I had signed as emergency pickup because I was the one who actually came. Printouts from the library database, the brand memoir, the faulty notarization, the marriage license with the oddly trembling line. The judge was a woman with hair so tightly wound it could hold up a bridge. She listened. She asked questions I had rehearsed answers to. Ma'am, she said finally, this seems to be more than a simple visitation dispute. Yes, I said. But my goal is simple. I want to see my grandchildren without being told I am an embarrassment. The courtroom door opened. Nora walked in, silk and glass, eyes like polished coin. She sat beside Adam, who stared at the table as if it might tell him what to do. Their attorney wore a tie tied by an obedient heart. He rose. Your Honor, he began. We have concerns about environmental disparities. Speak clearly, the judge said. The grandmother is financially limited, he said, choosing words as if they might stain him. The children have become accustomed to certain standards. Are you suggesting, the judge replied, that love requires granite countertops? The attorney faltered. No, of course not, but what? We must consider brand exposure. The mother's work involves public partnerships. The judge's eyebrows moved half an inch. I see. Nora stood. It's not about money, she said, a tremor at the edge of her voice that could have been sincerity or performance. It's about safety. Consistency. The kids need consistency, I repeated. Like when your name is Nora on the marriage license, but your brand memoir lists you as Eva May. Like when a notarization stamp expires before it blesses your signature. I slid the copy across to the attorney, watched his face pale the way paper does when it knows it will be torn. Or perhaps consistency like telling a grandmother she's too poor to be seen. For a second, the room was so quiet I could hear the clock feel embarrassed about making noise. The judge leaned forward. We will set a temporary schedule, she said evenly, turning to the clerk. Supervised by a neutral third party, no, strike that, supervised by the court's family support services. 3 afternoons a week. And we will set an evidentiary hearing in 6 weeks. I would also like counsel for the mother to address the concerns raised about identities and charitable documents. She looked at Nora, then at Adam, then softly at me. In the meantime, do not speak of brands in my courtroom again. When we stepped into the hallway, Nora kept her eyes a fraction too bright. Adam's face was a map with no roads. You're making a spectacle, he said under his breath. No, I said. I am making a record. Records have a way of becoming doorways. In the weeks that followed, time split into 2 braids. Afternoons with my grandchildren in a supervised room painted the color of reassurance, and evenings spent following the quiet trail of bees. The kids did not care about supervision. They cared about card games and the way pierogi taste when a grandmother blows on them twice. They cared about the story I started at the end of each visit, the one I vowed would be finished when the judge said it would. Why do we need a judge, Grandma? The older one, Lily, asked, head tilted the way her father's does when he's trying to forgive himself for something he hasn't done yet. Because sometimes, I said, people argue about what the word family can do. Do words do things? she said. Yes, I answered. If they're written down. At night, I wrote. Not fiction. I wrote facts that had sharp corners. Mr. Pennington brought me coffee and muttered about tax records. Mariana, slipped a second envelope under the mat of my apartment, this time a list of donors to the Honey and Bone Fund. 3 names repeated with precise generosity, giving sums that never bent around curious eyes. Each name, when I typed it, led to a shell company whose addresses were mail drops dressed as respectable doors. It smelled not like crime, but like concern with a mask on. The night before the evidentiary hearing, I was too wired to sleep. I folded and refolded their school drawings. I ironed my thrift store blazer, pressed the seams of my skirt. The locket photo on my phone burned a spot in my pocket. Around midnight, I received a text from an unknown number that knew my name as if it had been engraved into me. Stop digging, it read. Bees sting. I smiled. So do grandmothers, I said to the empty kitchen, then powered off my phone and went to bed because the strongest revenge sometimes is waking up early. Morning arrived clean. I braided my hair. Walked to the bus. Stopped at Sparrow Park on impulse. The bench where the locket had winked at me weeks ago was empty, but on the tiny notice board someone had taped a photocopy, grainy, crooked, of a missing persons flyer from 19 years ago. A girl with a serious mouth and defiant eyes. Name, Eva May Navratil. Age then, 17. Missing since, the year the brand memoir claimed a reinvention. On the bottom, a note in unfamiliar handwriting, not missing. Moved. I took a photo of that, too. In court, the judge's hair could have held up a cathedral. The attorney for Nora requested a continuance within seconds of the clerk calling our case. The judge nodded once. Reasons? New documentation, he said, glancing at Nora, then at me. Which we must review before. Motion granted, said the judge as if she had expected the dance. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, Nora whispered to Adam, relieved and brittle. I approached the counsel table. You lost this, I said. I opened my hand. The silver locket lay on my palm, beglinting like a tiny, stubborn sun. Nora's face changed the way rooms change when you open the window. Fear rushes in wearing a different name. Where did you? At the park, I said. Where you lost it. Where you leave things you don't want to hold. She didn't touch it. She looked not at me but at the judge, then at the court officers, calculating jurisdictions, publicity, the brand of trouble she could not influence. Keep it, she said finally, voice soft as thread. It doesn't belong to me anymore. I closed my hand around the metal and felt the wings press into my skin. As we left, Adam caught my elbow, the way little boys do when they're about to ask for things. Mom, he said, as if the word might rebuild a bridge that still existed, just underwater. What are you doing? What I was always going to do, I answered. I am giving the truth in a dress. He let go, watched his wife the way you watch a weather report, and followed her down the hall. 2 days later, the first article appeared online, so careful it could have been a piece of lace. Local foundation faces questions over grant paperwork. It quoted no one but included everything. Within hours, Honey and Bone's social pages filled with comments that looked polite and smelled like smoke. Nora posted a statement about clerical errors and bad actors, words that always crowd together when someone wants to hide the size of a suitcase. Because we are who we are, by evening she posted a photo of the kids in matching outfits, happiness as shield. I didn't comment. I set the phone down and boiled water. I planned the last piece of the plan while the kettle sang. It needed a room, a microphone, an audience that wasn't already on someone's payroll. The charity gala would only sharpen her performance. I needed something humbler, with chairs that creaked. I booked the community center under the pretense of a family story night, the kind the library used to run before budgets shredded. I asked Mr. Pennington to read the disclaimer that the center makes you recite before any gathering. I asked Mariana to sit in the back and keep her head down. I invited exactly 3 people who could not be bought by brand, a reporter who covers school lunches like their foreign policy, a social worker who once said the right thing at the wrong meeting and lost a promotion, and a clerk who still believes that stamping a page is a sacred act. I stood at the front with my notebook. People arrived the way they arrive for storms. The kids sat in the first row, hands folded, faces brave. Nora did not come. Adam did. He stood in the doorway, attention flickering like a photo in the old projector at the school. Today's story, I began, is about a bee, a locket, and the difference between a brand and a family. If this sounds like a fairy tale, it isn't. Fairy tales end at weddings. Families begin there. I held up the locket. It caught the fluorescent light and made it look almost kind. This, I said, once meant belonging. To a girl who thought another name would keep her safe. She grew into a woman who learned that control feels like safety if you hold it tight enough to bruise someone else. I told the story the way it had happened, minus the parts that would invite a lawsuit before the cookies on the back table were eaten. I showed the notarization with the wrong date. I showed the brand memoir. I read the missing persons flyer without calling anyone a thief of names. When I finished, the room pulsed with quiet. The reporter's pen had bled through her notebook. The social worker's jaw had a new line in it. The clerk closed her eyes in a small prayer I recognized from my mother's apron days. Questions? I asked. A hand rose from the back, an old woman's hand, bones elegant. And the grandchildren? She asked simply. That, I said, is why we are here. The rest is weather. Afterward, Adam stood in front of me with the face of a boy who'd lost and found something in the same breath. Mom, he said. Is it true? You already know which parts are, I replied. The rest you will learn when you stop asking your wife first. I pressed the locket into his palm. He flinched at the cold metal, then closed his fingers around it like a vow. Outside, the night smelled like first rain. Somewhere between the parking lot and my bus stop, a car idled too long. When it pulled away, its bumper sticker flashed for a second in the streetlight, a bee with a crown. Mr. Pennington walked me home without making a story out of it. At my door, he turned, eyes amused and grave. You know the thing about hives, he said. They look busy, I answered. They look united, he corrected. But sometimes there are just 1,000 private ones masquerading as a cause. I slept with the window open and dreamed of a field where the flowers refused to teach the bees their names. 2 weeks passed like a held breath. Then came the hearing where stories collide with documents and decide which one gets to be called truth in public. That morning, Nora did not appear with silk and glass. She arrived in a simple dress, no jewelry. She brought a lawyer I'd never seen, the kind with a briefcase that looks inherited. Your Honor, he said when our case was called. We request to speak in chambers. The judge's eyebrows lifted half an inch again. You may request, she said. But we will proceed in open court. The new lawyer did not flinch. Then we will proceed. He glanced at Nora. She kept staring forward as if forward were safer than any other direction. Adam sat 2 chairs away from her. He did not look at me. He did not look at anyone. Members of the court, the new lawyer said, and I knew then that he was not from here. People from here call them Your Honor and Ma'am and Sir when they're tired. He slid a slim folder to the clerk and one to me, because it is good theater to pretend you are being generous to the person who is about to ruin your client. Inside, photos, grainy, time-worn, of a young woman with a braid like the one I make when my hands hurt. Under each, a name, Eva May, and a note, Ward of State, emancipated at 17. A police report, caregiver exploitation, dismissed for lack of evidence. A change of name filing stamped in a county 2 states away. The same E that sat on the back of the locket tucked itself into every line of ink. She ran, the lawyer said, voice even. She reinvented. Not to hide wrongdoing, but to survive it. He didn't mention the grant letter with the expired notary. He only acknowledged errors rectified, a consultant terminated, a set of practices corrected and the light. He turned to me. And in that reinvention, she became protective. Excessively. Unkindly, he allowed. To a woman who loved her grandchildren. That is why we are here. For a second, I felt the story shift under my feet the way ice does when the river wants to remember it as water. I looked at Nora. She did not look back. The judge watched me instead of them. Ma'am, she said softly. Do you have a response? Yes, I said. I have a question. Ask. I turned to Nora. When you decided my small life was an eyesore, did you remember who you were before your new name? My voice surprised me by not shaking. Or did you forget so thoroughly you thought money could fill in the lines? Nora's face worked like someone tightening a knot. For the first time, I saw the girl from the photo, younger than her years, dangerous to herself because she'd been taught danger belonged in her hands. She began and stopped. The judge took off her glasses the way women do when they've earned the right to be impatient. Here is what will happen, she said. A standing visitation schedule with overnights at the grandmother's home, beginning this weekend. No supervision, no interference. The father will deliver the children. If he cannot, a court officer will. The mother will refrain from posting any material with the children's image until the completion of a custody review because I will not allow litigation to become content. She looked at me. Ma'am, keep your records. I will, I said. Counsel, she added, fix your paperwork. If I see another stale seal in my courtroom, I will garnish your reputation until it remembers how to live within the law. The gavel did not bang. It merely existed, and that was enough. In the hall, Adam leaned his forehead against a patch of wall as if his blood were a radio trying to tune itself to the right station. I touched his shoulder. Bring them Saturday, I said. We'll make blueberry pancakes and watch the old cartoons where the wolf always thinks he's smarter than he is. He swallowed. Mom, he whispered. I didn't know all of it. You knew the parts that mattered, I replied, not unkindly. You just forgot them on your wife's dresser. He made a sound that might have been a laugh if it weren't so small. Saturday, he said finally. I walked out into a day that looked like it had been washed and hung to dry. On the courthouse steps, a woman I did not know approached with a paper cup of tea. For courage, she said. I already spent mine, I said, taking it. There's always change, she answered, and smiled in a way that made me think of Mariana. I went home and cleaned like I had guests coming who would finally be allowed to stay. In the back of the closet, I found the box with the quilt I made for Lily when she was born, squares from Adam's old shirts, squares from nights I thought love might save us from the cost of being people. I washed it and hung it to line with fresh courage. Saturday came. I listened for the bus brakes outside my building like they were a hymn. When the footsteps thundered up my stairs, I steadied myself on the banister that has kept me from falling more times than I will admit. The door opened. Lily ran in first, then Max, arms out, faces wild with the relief that children who haven't been allowed to be loud in too long feel in their bodies. Adam stood in the doorway holding a small velvet bag. For you, he said. I opened it and let a chain slide into my palm. The locket. The bee. He had polished it until it reflected a grandmother's face back at her as if to ask, do you still want to see? Keep it, he said. She says it doesn't belong to her anymore. Tell her, I answered, belonging is not something you can take by saying so. He nodded. Mom, he added, as if he had one more thing to hand me. There's someone watching the house sometimes. A car with a sticker. I know, I said. I've met their bees. He opened his mouth, closed it, shrugged like a man who has decided to live in the honest light or not at all. I'll be back at 6, he said. Text if you need more time. We always need more time, I replied. That's why we make pancakes. He left. I locked the door. I put the locket in the sugar bowl where my mother hid $20 bills during hard months, a tiny bank of sweetness for emergencies. Then I turned to my grandchildren and asked the only question that matters when a storm passes without taking your roof, hungry. They laughed. We cooked. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a door clicked open on a hallway I hadn't dared walk. If the locket didn't look like proof anymore, it looked like a key. To what I would learn the next day, when my mailbox held a letter with no stamp and only 3 words on the back flap, for the beekeeper. The envelope was thick the way secrets get when they've eaten too many people. Inside, a single photograph, a photocopy of a hospital intake, and a folded note written in block letters that avoided personality like a disguise avoids eye contact. The photo showed a sterile hallway, a child's mural of clouds, and a girl with a braid sitting on a plastic chair, knees together as if her bones understood that if she took up less space, someone might let her stay. The date stamp in the corner, 19 years ago. The girl, Eva May. She was holding a tiny oval that I recognized even in monochrome. The locket. The B. The hospital intake form was for a woman named Milena Navardil, clinic you could drive to if you pointed your car toward the river and kept going until the city shrugged off its nicer clothes. Diagnosis: elder neglect, malnutrition. Emergency contact: none. Discharge to blank. The note read, she kept the B because it was the only thing that looked like a promise. She learned later that promises can be cages if you lock the wrong door. No signature. No threats. Just a story pressed into an old woman's hands like an assignment. I tucked the photo behind the flower jar. I placed the intake with my court papers. I folded the note along the crease it had been given. Then I sat at the table and let the kettle moan itself into courage. I knew what the letter was asking: empathy, if not forgiveness. But empathy is a bridge, not a parachute. You still have to walk glass sometimes. I began with Milena. The clinic had changed names and paint color, but the woman who guarded the records desk had the same kind eyes that show up in every building where people enter with more pain than paperwork. I did not lie. I'm looking for information on an older case, I said. A woman who might not have had anyone to make sure the world wrote her down. The woman tilted her head. You family? Yes, I said. It is not always untrue to call a stranger family when their story threatens to become your own. She pulled a box of records from a shelf that sat heavy with forgotten lives. We digitized recent ones, she said, explaining the box as if it might apologize for being analog. Old ones, we try to keep places for them. She thumbed through Manila until she found Milena's folder. Can't give you everything, she said softly. But here. Inside, a social worker's note, written in careful handwriting that reminded me of nuns who had made my knuckles smart. Daughter, Eva May. Protective. Explosive when spoken down to. Recommend family counseling and temporary intervention if caregiver safety not assured. Outcome: aged out of system. No further contact. I copied the notes by hand. The clerk watched, unoffended by my poverty. What will you do with it? She asked. What everyone always does, I said. I will carry it and hope it sits light. Outside, the air wore the kind of cold that doesn't belong to weather. I walked to the river and sat on the stone wall where teenagers carve initials when love feels like rock. The wind lay a hand on my cheek. All right, I told it and myself. All right. Empathy did not change my goal. I still wanted what had been refused me. I wanted my grandchildren to walk up my stairs without a permission slip. But it shifted my map. Revenge, I decided, should never be the fire you stand in to stay warm. It should be the light you shine through another person's performance until the audience sees the ropes. So I set a different stage. Honey and Bone announced a family heritage gala on a Thursday. Gold paper invitations, clean typography, a logo that made the I wanna be wealthy. Attendees would wear navy and cream and talk about legacy between sponsored flower arrangements. The event would be held at the museum with the glass staircase that looks like it's holding its breath. 3 days before the gala, I sent envelopes. Not to the police, they were already busy learning how not to be embarrassed in front of a camera. Not to Nora's board, boards are trained to hold a straight face while the floor moves. I mailed one to the reporter who wrote about school lunches. One to a woman who reviews charities like a surgeon looking at a scan. One to a regulation office with a name so boring it must wield quiet power. Each envelope contained the expired notarization copy, a list of donors whose generosity repeated too neatly, the intake note for Milena, and a single sentence written in my best penmanship: ask about the bee. On the day of the gala, I wore the only dress I own that knows how to visit a museum. I pinned my hair up with the combs my mother wore when she wanted to look like a woman people didn't think they could cheat. In the sugar bowl, the locket glinted like a witness. I did not receive an invitation, so I did not go to the gala. This is crucial. There is a difference between stepping into a room to demand a scene and arranging the curtains so the scene reveals itself. Instead, I went to the community center across town where the museum interns ran a weekend art program. I sat on a folding chair and helped glue paper wings to paper bees with 8 children who didn't yet know that everything beautiful they made would one day be branded by someone with a louder voice. Why bees? A boy asked, smearing glue on his sleeve. Because they find their way home, I said. Even when the path forgets them. On the bus back, my phone felt heavy. I didn't check it. The older I get, the more I trust the timing of tea. At home, I put water on, took out flour, cracked eggs not because I needed cake, but because sometimes the only way to wait is to bake. By the time a headline found me local founder faces donor irregularity questions at Heritage Gala, I had already washed the mixing bowl. The article used phrases like clarified and review ongoing and seeking transparency, and included a photo where Nora faced camera angles like a fencer meeting a sudden blade. The reporter I'd written to had posted a thread so calm it cut. The charity reviewer wrote about patterns that don't lie even when people do. The regulation office confirmed an inquiry as if they'd been waiting for a chance to confirm anything all year. In the comments, the hive turned on itself. Some argued for reform, some for mercy, some for theatrics. It didn't matter. What mattered was this. The woman who told me my kitchen was an embarrassment had been asked if her paperwork set a better table. And she could not answer without removing the plate entirely. 2 mornings later, Adam dropped the kids off early and stood awkward in my doorway with a duffel bag and no script. She's going to her mother's for a while, he said. PR wants space. How much space? I asked. He looked at the bag like it might tell him what to say. Enough. As long as the schedule holds, I said, you can live on the moon. He half smiled and put the bag down. They ate cereal, he said suddenly, anxious about smaller sins. With those oat flakes in it. We'll fix that. I ruffled Max's hair. You want eggs? Why do they write stories about our mom? Lily asked. Because adults sometimes forget that children can read, I said. And because some stories don't know how to stay inside a house. She nodded, serious. Are we in trouble? Never, I said. You're in pancakes. We built a morning out of butter and blue plates. The children's laughter stitched the kitchen into something new. I opened the window and let the day walk in without knocking. The court date for final orders arrived the following week. I ironed my skirt again, not because fabric changes outcomes, but because it changes how you stand. The judge's hair was a warning to anyone tempted to pile nonsense on the record. Nora entered with no jewelry and a different lawyer, this one with softer edges. Adam walked in last, carrying the children's paper bees on the top of his briefcase like a private protection detail. Before we begin, the judge said, I've reviewed submissions from counsel and communications from state offices. I do not intend to adjudicate issues beyond my purview. Understood, Your Honor, said the new counsel, voice calm, a little cracked at the edges the way human voices should be when they are being honest. My decision, the judge continued, balances the children's best interest, the parents' rights, and the grandmother's established relationship. It is as follows, a structured, unsupervised visitation plan with alternating weekends and one evening during the week at the grandmother's home. Any modifications must be agreed upon in writing. The court also orders both parents to attend a family systems counseling program. She glanced up at me. Grandmother may attend at the therapist's discretion. Gratefully, I said. The judge paused, then added, and in light of concerns about public exposure, I cautioned counsel previously, and I repeat, the children are not a brand asset. Yes, Your Honor, the lawyer said. He meant it. For once, someone did. We stood. The gavel did not perform. It simply existed, again enough. In the hall, Nora approached me like a person, not a weather system. Up close, without bees on her ears, her face looked like the photo from 19 years ago, aged by money and fear. She handed me an envelope, legal size, no stamp. I'm not allowed to talk to reporters, she said. Neither am I replied. I just talk to kettles. I didn't say those things because you were poor, she said, words tripping over each other now that they didn't have a camera to arrange them. I said them because if the world didn't match my picture, I didn't know where to stand. Then learn to stand without a picture, I said. You're not the only person who had to build a place from a blank wall. I know, she whispered. I had a mother who taught me that. She glanced at the envelope. I think you know her. I recognized the weight of the paper inside before I opened it. Hospital records, the missing flyer, copies of the change of name order. And at the bottom, A single sheet in Nora's hand, no loops, no brand. It said, I was wrong. Not about safety. About shame. I'm sorry. Sorry is not a court order, I said, but I tucked the paper into my bag the way you tuck a baby blanket in January. Tell them I love them, she added. Even when I look like I don't. That is between you and the years, I said. But I'll make sure they hear something that sounds like it. She walked away like a person learning to count her steps out loud. At home, the children and I built forts from quilts and read mysteries with detectives who wore raincoats because fiction knows how to flatter a grandmother. When they napped, I opened Nora's envelope and found one more thing tucked behind the copies, a tiny key, the kind that opens boxes your mother told you never to open. On a tag, Storage A Queen ST22. I don't know if it's something in my bloodline or simply what happens when you live long enough to outlast other people's plots, but my hands did not shake. I called Mr. Pennington, who carries weariness the way other men carry a pocket knife. Field trip? I asked. Wear shoes that forgive dust, he said. The storage facility was a building that looked like a magazine did a profile on how to be anonymous. The clerk didn't glance up when we said a Queen ST. 22-inch until she looked at the key and then at me and decided to see what story she might be part of. The locker door rolled up like a theater curtain, reluctant to show a matinee performance. Inside, a plastic tote and a shoebox. The tote held scrapbooks, cheap and proof that expensive lives also look for glue. Photos of kids at a shelter holiday party. A teen in a braid teaching smaller hands to thread needles. The shoebox held letters written in crooked block by a woman getting used to her dignity, Milena, telling Eva to eat, to run if she had to keep the bee because our people came from hives where no queen was allowed to roam. At the bottom, beneath tissue paper, a second locket, newer, heavier, the bee crowned. Inside, a tiny photo of Lily smiling, Max's hand arriving into frame like he could not stand to be left out. On the back, the engraving wasn't an E. It was an H, crooked, humble, brave. My initial. I closed the locket and felt it solid in my palm. She meant this for you, Mr. Pennington said. She meant it for them, I corrected. With my letter inside. We took nothing else. You learn, if you are serious, to leave other people their relics. On the walk back, rain flirted with our shoulders. Mr. Pennington cleared his throat. Do you think it's done? He asked. No, I said. I think it's quiet. Quiet is different than done. He nodded. You always talk like that? Only when I win with Mercy, I said. At home, I hung the second locket on a nail by the door, where keys go, where reminders live. The first, Eva's, remained in the sugar bowl. The children crashed through the apartment like weather. I breathed in the smell of pancakes, returned to room temperature, and finally allowed myself to sit down. Weeks passed with the rhythm I had begged the world to keep. School drop-offs, weekend overnight braids, small arguments about socks. I planted herbs on my windowsill. We baked on Thursdays. I sewed Lily a dress from a thrifted curtain that looked like it had nightmares I could cut into squares and reinterpret. Adam joined us for dinner on Sundays and sometimes forgot to look at his phone for a whole hour. Nora did not come. She sent postcards without return addresses, a lighthouse, a field, a city with water that looked staged. Each postcard had 3 words, learning to listen. On the back of the last one, a bee sticker that looked like a child had chosen it with proud fingers. The inquiry kept spooling. The brand apologized twice, revised mission statements, posted photos of board retreat, deep listening circles. The regulators did what regulators do. The charity reviewer wrote a coda about how good intentions should hire better auditors. The reporter wrote one last piece about accountability and school lunches, because to her those were the same story. I stopped checking my phone after dinner. Some victories need to chill in a dark room before serving. One evening, in the late part of summer when the light forgets for a second that it must leave, I took the children to Sparrow Park. They climbed. I watched the bench where the locket first flashed at me as if it might cough up one more clue. A woman sat down, not Mariana, not someone I knew. She wore a cardigan the color of tea. On her wrist, a thin bracelet with a charm, a bee, no crown. Her hands folded like someone who had learned that being still is not the same as being invisible. Beautiful, I said, nodding at the bracelet. She looked at me, then at the children. They look like they belong to a story with a good grandmother, she said. I am a grandmother with a story, I replied. She smiled, private. I used to wear a locket, she said out of nowhere. Lost it here. Funny how the past will leave breadcrumbs when it's tired of being chased. Yes, I said. Sometimes the bread is bees. She laughed, then stood. Keep your windows locked, she said kindly. Not because of danger. Because good things sometimes wander off if you don't convince them they're welcome. When she left, the bench looked like it had moved a half-inch. That night, I tucked the children in under the fort that now had a roof because Max had insisted and Lily had engineered. Adam stood in the hallway like a man training his body to stop apologizing to gravity. I filed for a separate account for the kids, he said. Only me, and he swallowed. You. That's wise, I said. Send me the papers. He nodded. And he looked at his hands. I went to a meeting. For people who think their choices are other people's fault. How was it? Hard, he said. Good, I replied. We like hard things. They take less space on the shelf. He smiled because that made no sense and perfect sense at once. Good night, Mom. Good night, I said, and closed the door on the small empire of peace I'd built with sugar and stubbornness. The last letter came when chrysanthemums fatten at the market and the old men who sell them argue lovingly about price. It was in the mailbox, no stamp again, no return address. Inside, a single sheet typed. You kept the bee alive. Thank you. You were right, belonging isn't something you take by saying so. It is something you protect until the person who forgot it remembers. I'm still learning. If you hear a car outside sometimes, it's just me making sure I'm brave enough to pass this block without stopping. Tell them their mother is doing the only honest thing she can do right now, not performing. P.S. The locket in the sugar bowl has a hinge I couldn't open without breaking it. It is not just a locket. Not my secret to tell. If you ever need the rest of the story, you now know where to press. There was no signature. The bee sticker on the flap looked handmade. The paper smelled faintly of lemons and the kind of sadness that isn't asking to be fixed. I held the letter the way you hold a baby you didn't expect to see again. Then I moved to the kitchen, lifted the lid off the sugar bowl, and took out the older locket. It warmed in my hand like a small animal deciding whether to trust you. I held it up to the light. There, at the rim, a barely visible seam, a second hinge. I ran my fingernail along it. The metal gave not like surrender but like a bow. The back plate clicked open to reveal a space no thicker than truth. Inside, a grain of something white, polished into smoothness by years of being worried by a thumb. Not a pearl. Not a stone. A tooth. A child's baby tooth, small, perfect, milky, kept the way poor women keep charms that they can't afford by putting faith into objects, because sometimes objects keep faith better than people do. Behind the tooth, folded so tiny it felt like handling a secret religion, a strip of paper. I eased it out and read, EMH, 3 letters. Eva. Milena. Halka. A family that existed even when it didn't allow itself to be believed. I put the tooth back because some relics asked to be left alone. I closed the locket. I returned it to sugar, a sacrament in a bowl. That night, the street beneath my window held its breath. A car idled long enough to make me worry, then moved like a decision. On its back bumper, a sticker flashed in the yellow of the streetlight, a bee uncrowned. The car did not pause at the stop sign. It flowed like something learning the geography of a better map. I sat at my table with the window open, listening to the memory of an engine disappear. The clock ticked softly. The refrigerator remembered it had a job. In the bedroom, Lily turned in her sleep and murmured that funny little bird sound she makes when her dreams demand better staging. I made tea. I stood at the window. I felt the weight of the 2 lockets on either side of the room like bookends holding up a story not finished and somehow finally safe to tell. When you are 63, you learn the wisdom of incomplete endings. A judge can write an order. A reporter can write a headline. A mother can write a note. A grandmother can write a line on a page that says the door is open. But some stories decide to keep walking because the going is good and the road is a kind of forgiveness. Weeks later, the kids helped me make gingerbread. We stuck almond slivers into dough and called them wings. Bees, Max announced. For our hive. Our hive, Lily corrected, drawing a little crown on hers with a toothpick. Then she looked at me with those serious eyes, and without asking why she was asking, said, "Grandma, are we poor?" "Sometimes," I said. "But never in the ways that count." "How do you know?" "Because we never run out of tea," I said. "And because we never run out of stories." Outside, a car door closed gently. Footsteps retreated without climbing our stairs. The window gathered the sound and let it go. I wore the new locket to the market the next morning, the one with my initial on its back. A woman at the flower stall touched the bee with one finger and smiled knowingly. "Old?" she asked. "New," I said. "And old." She handed me a small pot of thyme. "For courage," she said. "I already spent mine," I replied, taking it. "There's always change," she answered, and the whole street seemed to agree. On the way home, I passed a poster in the community center window, "Family Night, Stories, Crafts, Tea." Underneath, "Hosted by Helena." Someone had written Grandma in parentheses, an annotation that told the truth in fewer letters than a court order. I unlocked my door. The apartment smelled like ginger and children and the particular kindness of clean floors. I set the time on the windowsill between the basil and the slowly recovering mint. The sugar bowl sat where it always sits, ordinary and holy. When the kettle sang, I poured. A tiny bean laid on a locket caught the light and made a private star on my kitchen wall. I stood in the glow of it. And somewhere outside, past the stop sign and the corner store and the seriousness that money wears when it wants to be believed, a car moved through the city like a promise learning how to keep itself. I don't know if Nora will come back in the way that makes holidays easier. I don't know if Adam will ever forgive himself fully for letting a script talk for him. I don't know if the brand will remember it tried to call childhood content. I don't know if the world will decide tomorrow that poor grandmothers are allowed to be seen without apology. I do know this. On my kitchen windowsill, next to the thyme and the cup with the chip that my mother gave me when she said I was old enough to spill and clean it up myself, 2 lockets throw light across a table that holds 3 plates every Saturday morning. One holds a child's tooth. One holds my initial. Both hold bees that learned their way home. And on the bench at Sparrow Park, if the sun is right, you can still see a faint impression where a silver oval once lay, a small shadow shaped like an opening. The kind of opening that invites you to lean closer and press, just there, with your nail, until whatever is hidden gives a little and tells you what you need to know and no more.
Your watch to the end. Be click here. You will hear another story from my grandma.